You're listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast with Jody Livingston, episode number 37. I hope you have some great expectations for this episode, because it is great.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now your host, Jody Livingston.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you today. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. If it's your first time listening and checking out the podcast, welcome. Thanks for heading on over and giving it a listen. And if you're coming back, well, as always, thanks for coming on back. You can find me on the Twitter sphere at Jody Livingston. That's Jody Livingston. And of course, over on the Facebook at The Longer Haul. All of the links and resources mentioned in today's show, you can find over on the show notes page at thelongerhaul.com/episode 037. That's thelongerhaul.com/037. I'm excited for today's interview. Our guest today is Zach Workin, and he is the co-host of an excellent youth ministry podcast called After 9. And so if you haven't already checked that out, I encourage you to do so. Great podcast, very high quality for sure. Just really, really good stuff on there. You'll hear him talk a little bit more about that in the show, so I will let him do that in the interview rather than me. He is a youth ministry veteran, though, who has come and gone from the great state of Oklahoma and then come back again. And so he's going to talk with us today a little about expectations. What does that look like? As far as the expectations that we have in leaving. And so in his context, we talk about leaving to pursue school and seminary and what the expectations were there, what the expectations were coming out of that, and even then going back kind of to the home state nearby, and what all of that looked like, expectations felt from churches, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We also talk a little bit about networking and the importance of that, so you're going to want to make sure you check it out for sure. He is a good guy, and it's a great interview for you, so I hope you have some great expectations today for this. And so with all of that said and all that out of the way, we'll jump in here today to today's interview with Zach Workin from After 9. Well, hey, Zach, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on. I'm excited to have you on today to talk about expectations. Particularly, I think that's such an important thing to consider.
Absolutely.
You know, whether you're just starting out, part-time, full-time, you've been doing this a long time, in a time of transition, just going through a time of transition, like really any scenario along the way, I think it's really important. I'm especially grateful for you to take the time to come on. You're driving in your car right now.
Man, I love technology. So it's great. We're in the car. We're making it happen. It's great.
It's better than texting and driving. And so
That's right. It's safer. Podcasting and driving.
Podcasting and driving. So anyway, if you don't know Zach, he is the co-host and co-founder of a podcast called After 9. He is a youth pastor, youth worker, seminary grad guy, loves youth ministry. On your way right now to go meet with some youth pastors, in fact.
State level, yeah, man, doing the meeting thing.
So out there in the middle of nowhere.
Flyover country, Oklahoma, yeah. So for Tulsa, Oklahoma City, to Oklahoma is home. I spent some time in North Carolina as well. But hey, Jody's listeners, I'm Zach Workin, and I am a co-host for After 9 Youth Ministry, and Jody and I are good friends because of podcasting.
Yeah.
And because of the internet age we live in and social media connections. And so
that's right.
You got to love connectionalism. So driving today, Oklahoma, doing youth ministry out here. Grew up in Oklahoma and grew up in a great student ministry. I am a product of a good student ministry and a student pastor because of the efforts of student pastors that have gone before. And the student pastor that I had growing up is still a mentor today. And so I always say that I'm operating out of a positive experience and not a negative experience of youth ministry. Did some work in Oklahoma City for 4.5 years or so as a youth pastor, and then moved out east to North Carolina for 3.5 years to go to seminary at Duke Divinity. Graduated there after working with some different churches, and then moved back to Tulsa, which was kind of like moving back home, but not exactly. And so I've been at a church here in Tulsa for the last couple years or so, and it's been great.
And so, having been there and then left and come back,
it's a hobbit's journey, Jody. So I'm pretty tall for a hobbit, but it is kind of a there and back again kind of tale.
Well, you have hairy feet.
So I do have hairy feet. So I'm a very tall, bearded guy with hairy feet. So it's kind of like a half wizard, half hobbit.
It all makes sense.
Yeah, it all works out. Yeah.
So let's talk about expectations.
Man, you said, hey, I want to talk about expectations. And I said, no, I want to talk about expectations. So
so you left. And what kind of expectations come with leaving? I mean, because when I think of this, here's what I'm thinking of. I think you probably have expectations for the ministry that you're leaving, of what will happen after you leave. And then, of course, you're looking and thinking ahead.
Yeah.
But within that also is like what you're going to do once you leave.
Next. Yeah.
Right. So how did all that play out?
So the leaving Oklahoma City part was bittersweet. So the church I actually served in was my home church. And so there was a deep history of being a student there, leaving for undergrad, and then coming back to serve there on staff. And so my heart still goes out to them, and I still am in frequent contact with the pastor there and then the youth minister that followed me there. And so it was hard to leave. For me, the expectations of leaving, I think, were better received because I was leaving to go to seminary.
Right.
I know for a lot of folks, it helps because it's a very specific thing that doesn't endanger my relationship with the students. Like, this was not like, hey, everybody, I'm going to keep doing the thing I'm doing, but at a different church right down the road or whatever it is. Or, hey, I'm actually done with young people. I'm going to go hang out with adults now, or whatever the transition is. So for me, that particular transition was pretty well received because it was like I'm going on to the next part of the journey for stuff. But it was, I remember that last Wednesday kind of midweek gathering with them. Like, I gave my last talk and everybody knew, and we didn't like promote it, but people kind of knew that, like, after that, like Karen and I, my wife, were getting ready to kind of, pack up and move east. And so, we kind of, didn't make like a big celebration about it, but kind of, people knew. And so some former students that had graduated and gone to college that were back that summer came around. Some former youth workers and stuff were in the area. And, that night we had some songs, and then I shared a little bit, and we had that kind of like song of response after.
Yeah.
And then after the band kind of finished that song, it was really heavy. And it was just one of those moments. It was like, who speaks first? Like, what do we say now? And so there was a certain kind of like mourning and loss. But keeping in touch with them, it's been like 5.5 years ago, but keeping in touch with them, there's a lot of folks that have graduated out of that ministry that are still serving in that church, enrolls as deacons, enrolls in the youth ministry and children's ministry. But I'll never forget that night and just kind of like the almost kind of like grieving and mourning that kind of went with like, here is a chapter that we're closing.
Yeah. I think leaving is always hard. Even when you're in a situation where you just cannot
have to,
you're leaving in a very unhealthy, you've got to get out, right? Or a lot of guys, you're just wanting to leave. I had a student on that's in our college ministry now a few episodes back, and talking about from his perspective when the youth pastor left and what that was like, and then me coming in and kind of that transition on that side of things, I think it's just hard. It's always hard, for sure. So, okay, let me ask you a question before we go any further. So you grew up in the church, and then you became the youth pastor.
Yeah, so grew up in the church, went off to undergrad in a couple cities over, away from everything. And then when I was getting ready to graduate undergrad, my wife now, fiance at the time, and I knew that she needed to finish grad school in a town that was close to Oklahoma City, we needed to live in a town that was close to where she was finishing grad school at the University of Oklahoma. So we needed to be probably in the Oklahoma City area. And the pastor of my home church called me and was like, "Hey, we're looking for a youth pastor. You should put your name in." And I was like, "No, no." I'm like, that's weird, right? Like that's a weird thing to do. And he's like, "No, just put it in and see what happens." And so we applied there. We put our name in other places as well, to do some either college ministry or music ministry. But sure enough, like they called us back, and like what we talked about, and like them knowing that kind of, we were here until Karen finished her master's level work, and then seminaries on the horizon, and they were okay with all of it, and they were well received. And obviously there were some unique things that came with working at your home church, but there was really kind of a good cradle of growth as well, because I felt like I already knew the people I needed to know. Like I didn't have that like new church, new pastor mentality of like, all right, so we need some drivers for the event. Who are the people that I call? Right. Kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. So,
and there were some known entities, and then also some known problems that I felt like going in, I'm like, okay, I kind of know what's at work here.
Yeah. Now, how are the expectations there from their perspective, you coming in?
I'm not really sure. I would have to like probably ask them what they were kind of expecting of me. I was just expecting to come in and do what I had seen done as a student ministry student.
Yeah.
And so because it was my home church, and because I was literally walking into the office of my youth pastor and sitting down behind his old desk.
That's weird.
It's so weird. Like when you go through the books to clean out the office, and it's like your former youth pastor's names on the front of a lot of them, and you're like, yeah, he bought this. And so there is the kind of like that, hey, he bought this curriculum and never used it. Or wait a minute, he didn't write that. And so there was a lot of those kind of moments. So I don't know. Expectations are tough to say. I mean, I felt like I was very much a fresh-faced Bible student, because in my undergrad stuff, I studied Bible and theology and church history. And so I didn't really do a lot of ministry classes. So I was just coming and like the way I was doing stuff was in a lot of analogy to just what I had seen done.
Yeah.
But what I was trying to bring was, all of my, weighty new learning, like any fresh-faced Bible student graduate would have. And so I think I got to learn a lot of the ministry stuff because of, the various resources and books and learning labs and, blogs, 6 years ago were all over the place. And so there was a lot of key people online and from books and resources that I read that helped me put together things like a youth ministry philosophy or strategy or architecture and that kind of stuff.
And so then you left for school, and then so coming out of school now and coming back into vocational ministry for one.
Well, yeah.
I mean, there's expectations, and then to kind of go back near home again.
The home state again, yeah. So if you would have asked me in the middle of my seminary career, hey, what's the last thing you're going to do after you graduate here? I would have probably said youth ministry in Oklahoma again. And not because it was a bad experience, but I was just like, I've never really felt like that was like the call I was going to land on. Like I love young people, and I love, having an excuse to stay up with new music and new apps and new tech savvy things. And I get to play video games with kids, and I love that. But that's never been like, man, I'm just like looking for a youth ministry kind of deal. And so I think that was the kind of an unexpected bit of that. I didn't expect to make the re-return to my home state to do, in very many ways, the exact same kind of thing I was doing before I left for school, which I'm sure for some would make school feel a little bit like it wasn't necessary, which is another conversation, because it very much was. I mean, I'm a better minister because of my time spent in seminary.
Sure.
And especially for me, like to be a full-time student in seminary was a very gratifying and growing kind of experience. But to go back to Oklahoma Youth Ministry again, wow, I knew I wanted to be in vocational ministry. Like my call has always been, I need to serve the local church. Like whatever that looks like, I need to serve the local church.
Yeah. And so you end up back in Oklahoma.
Yep.
And you're walking into another youth ministry position, vocational.
Another youth ministry. And then here's the double layer, Jody. Here's the double layer. The church I'm at now was the church that I interned at 2 summers in college. And so, I mean, this is, I mean, people talk about like Methodist connectionalism. This is like, so Baptist networking is like Methodist connectionalism. And it's like, you always want to keep those names in your phone book. You always want to keep those names in your directory. Because again, I'm finishing seminary, and when you're Baptist, you apply everywhere.
Yeah.
Because it's a call system, and you're hoping somebody will make that call.
Right.
And so,
well, I think that's a good point though, because I know like for me, especially as a younger youth pastor when I first started out, and I think a lot of young youth pastors probably, I think I underestimated the value of networking.
Yeah. Well, because it feels like a dirty word, right? That's the word that like business people use that church folks shouldn't use, because we do things differently. And I think there's a way to do it dirty where you don't actually care about people, but to have your former mentors keep you close and to have people that you care about, to stay up with them, it's important. It's the way we, stay connected to what's going on, because nobody wants to hire off a piece of paper.
Right. And I think that's
hire off.
I think that's a good point too. I think, man, even now, I love so much and benefit so much from just networking with other youth pastors in my area. And sometimes that looks like us doing events together. Most of the time, it means having lunch together and just
a lot of coffees,
and just being able to kind of pray for one another, support one another, and talk through things that they do well. The guy across the street or down the road, across town, and he's killing it in this area, and I'm struggling, and so help me understand how you're doing this. Not so that I can replicate what you're doing, but so that I can create that in my environment and context. And,
yes.
I think that is something that is often neglected in that. And you may be in a context where that's not really possible, in the sense that there's not a lot of youth pastors near you.
Yeah.
But you can still reach out and find folks.
You can. I mean, I think, again, like Sam, I think about our friendship and conversation. I mean, we're both Baptist youth ministry guys in different states. I mean, there would be ways that we might happen to run into each other at a conference or something, but it really is through the digital means that we found each other.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it's the looking for it. And I think that's the part that people shy away from, is they just assume networks will happen upon them. But I think you have to go about building a network. And I think you do it with a certain kind of earnesty and a genuineness. Like, I think, when you go to a conference event, or when you go to, even if it's a local, like just citywide or even statewide gathering of, associate pastors or youth pastors or whatever your context kind of derives, like, try to make one new friend. Don't just have a friend and be good with it, but try to make a new friend and find out what somebody else is doing for the benefit of getting better, for the benefit of learning, and then for future stuff too. I mean, I think about how much trust is involved in youth ministry, and how nobody wants to be the person that vouches for someone they don't know very well. Right. And so we want to say, yeah, man, like, he's really good at this, or like, she's the best at that. So when someone says, hey, I'm really looking for somebody on my staff that is like good at this, like, I know who that person is because I know them. So I think that's
you're
really
saying
important.
that, like, I have this business card holder that, like, I put business cards in. When I open it, it like shoots flames
to go drop
out.
off in fish bowls for free lunches.
This thing like shoots flames out of the middle.
Yeah,
a little.
yeah.
I picked it up at a magic. Like, that's probably not the best approach, right?
No, well, I mean, if you're just trying to collect cards, then that's a different kind of game, right?
That's the kind of the sleazy part, right? Where
if you're just trying to collect everybody's card, I mean, I don't know. Like, and again, like, I think it's one of those. People know why you're doing it. People know why you're about it. And because there's such a multi-tiered way now to engage on Twitter and Facebook and email, that's so more seemingly genuine than just trying to collect phone numbers at a conference or whatever. There's ways to hone your search and to kind of like grow your. I mean, I think about all the Facebook groups. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 youth pastor Facebook groups now that are like over 3,000 to 5,000 youth ministers. Clearly, there's other people in the struggle. Clearly, there's other people in the midst. Sure. Don't just engage with them at a surface level. If someone writes a question you think is a really honest and powerful question, try to friend them and talk to them. I think it's important. Yeah.
Well, and I think even like in the sense of like the longer haul, if there's a blog post or if there's a podcast episode, and man, if there's a space to leave comments and you can add to that conversation or ask a question, like, for one, that's super encouraging for me that people are taking the time to do that, because I know that, man, time is a big deal. But I mean, I've seen that happen where, people have commented or asked a question, and then someone else kind of answers and chimes in, and this whole kind of community builds. And I mean, I have a phenomenal community at the Longer Haul. These guys are amazing. But those are opportunities where you can create community and network kind of beyond and outside. And I'll say this too. And you can tell me, you're kind of in the podcasting realm now, so that you probably get this. I have a lot of people that will kind of email me or reach out and say, hey, I'd love to come on your show and share this and that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have guests, so people end up coming on the show, obviously. But if you really want to reach out to somebody that you really look up to, find something that they're teaching or sharing, put that into practice.
Yep.
Make it work, and then share how that worked for you. Share the success of that, because it's hard, man, sometimes to do that. But at the same time, I'll say this. I don't think you need to reach out to everybody that's beyond you and where you are. Like, find people near you that you're going to be consistent to invest in your life.
You need people from your context. You need somebody that is fresh to your context, that is seeing it differently. You need somebody that's been there for a while. I mean, there's a guy across town who's been a Tulsa youth minister for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
He's been at a couple different churches, but he's been in youth ministry in Tulsa for almost 20 years. I mean, I try to call that guy once a month.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, like, what are you learning now? I mean, the place he's been at now, I think he's been there for 6 or 7 years. I'm like, what's going on? I mean, yeah, he's, 4 or 5 miles down the road, but it's still close enough that I need his wisdom. I need his experience. And then there's another guy that he and I talk a lot, because we feel like we're pulling from a lot of the same kind of context. There's a high school. I mean, every town has high schools, but the high school that we're pulling from, when there's issues surrounding like depression and suicide and runaway, like he and I are handling students that are interconnected with those students on different sides of the block. Yeah. And so it's wise for us to share, man, how are you receiving this? What do you see that's really going on? And that's such an important thing. And that is an honesty that it has nothing to do with, I'm trying to grow my network for my next job. Sure. That is, we are trying to co-labor in this ministry thing together. And so that's one of the things that for Chad and I, my other co-host for After 9, we really had the kind of onus of, we've got to start some conversations with honesty, because everybody wants to have them, but nobody wants to talk first.
Right.
And so there's just so many of those questions about man, I feel like my kids are just overwhelmed this week. Somebody else is probably feeling that too. And so we just got to start the conversation and then make space to listen, to hear what other folks have to say.
Yeah. And I think to always have an attitude of learning is so important.
Yes.
And to not, I don't have all this figured out. Every week brings new challenges. Every week I'm learning as I go, just like everybody else. And
if you go back to your friend list, I'm pretty sure the people you like the most in your life are the ones that are still asking questions and still waiting to hear answers and not trying to interject all the things that they know.
Sure.
That for me, that's the true basis for a good friendship is, are they still trying to learn? Do they still have new questions? Are they giving me better questions?
Yeah. I think just pursuing that in humility and for effectiveness. And that's especially important. Like if you're in the context where you have one high school or two high schools that you're pouring and investing in, or middle schools, man, even more so do you need to be networking and working together for that, that cause.
Yeah. You should know all the youth pastors in town.
Yeah. My context, I mean, I was making a list for a guy today. I've got 6 or 7 high schools that we have students in that are, 4,000 or 5,000 plus.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, some of them. And so that's a different animal altogether. But if even then, it's even more important for me also, because you can only do so much. But
that's right.
Okay, so we went off topic there, but I think that was important for sure.
The networking, expectations, good things. Yeah.
So when you're coming back in, then what kind of expectations did you have coming back in to youth ministry?
So I think coming back in the second time around, to borrow from you, Joey Livingston, Mr. Jody, I wanted to build a culture. And so one of the things that I knew about the church is that they were a healthy church. And for me to come in and try to do the show was not what they needed, because they were already healthy. This wasn't like I needed to come in and kickstart some youth fire for the, this kind of aging congregation. The place I'm at now is quite honestly one of the coolest, healthiest churches I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
It's denominational enough. It's very multi-generational. It's very grace-centered, and it's very loving and supportive of its youth and children's ministries. And so it's kind of this dream of a place that where they were when I came in was they were kind of down in the dumps about their youth ministry stuff. The guy that had started there before had been there for a long time, and then there was some space of nothing. And so it was kind of almost like they had kind of gone through a bad breakup, where it was we had known this thing in a certain way for so very long, and now we don't know how to do it without him. And so there was a very much kind of starting over. And so it was almost a blank tablet in many ways. There was a canvas to work on from stuff, but there was also some DNA in kind of the conversation. So I spent the first 6 months just doing a lot of listening. You know, what do you like? Like, when do you like coming to church? Or like, what are your favorite memories of the last few years? And so there was inside of the group a deep resonance to go and be about mission stuff. So one of the things that like I in that process discerned is that we're going to have to do some kind of travel mission trip every year. Now, it may only be like one state over, or, you know, last year we went to Canada, which is not like, you know, this glamorous, you know, exotic kind of location or whatever. But for them, like, they loved going to mission trip kind of excursions as much or more as going to like the camp experience.
Yeah.
And that's a holdover from the previous youth minister that I am so thankful for, because their heart is turned towards service.
Yeah.
And so it was really important in whatever other aesthetic changes or, you know, stylistic changes, that was a DNA piece that was important. Also, there was a really strong culture of adult leaders leading small groups. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but I think the way in which to say it that's important is I have really good leaders that have excellent skill sets or have been taught excellent skill sets in leading like a discussion group. They have not been really like groomed to be full-blown teachers. And so like our Sunday morning model is different than most of the churches in town, and that I don't just give them a lesson and turn them loose. Like, they are doing a very particular kind of guided discussion.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, and we've talked about this too, and I've said this a lot. Like, I think that's wise, and that's why so much I pour in and press in on guys to build a culture and not a ministry, because you come in to build a ministry, you're going to change so many things, and
you're going to change too much.
And there are things that probably are sustainable and healthy regardless of your circumstance. So taking time to really walk through that and discern those before you start really, you know, making a lot of those changes is really, really, really wise. What kind of things personally, what kind of expectations did you have personally for yourself walking back into that?
Well, so one of the things that you can only know when you take a second job over a first job is to ask before you even get there, what do you expect of me? And so for the Baptist process, there was a kind of a committee, because there's always a committee in the Baptist process, but there was kind of a youth ministry steering or like call committee that was like kind of doing the selection process alongside of our executive pastor, HR kind of person. And so, you know, for as many questions as they had for me of like, who are you? Why would you be our good youth pastor? I would say things like, well, what kind of youth pastor are you looking for? And, you know, and even if they don't have an answer, it's important to hear the answer and the non-answers, because that helps to frame, you know, what's important, what's not important. Like I say, one of the things that Chad and I've talked about recently in the realm of expectations is that sometimes we're really good at the thing that nobody cares that we're good at. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of youth pastors are like, oh my gosh, I've got to have the best Facebook page, or I've got to have the best slides on my midweek service. And like, if that's a personal thing for you that you're like, man, if it doesn't look good, then I won't do it. That's fine. But don't miss out that when you were in the first meeting, or you were in the first kind of like waves of stuff, there was that mom that was like, I'd really like our youth pastor to be at our school lunches more. Yeah. So like for me, like slides on a Wednesday always take a back seat to making sure I'm at least at a couple lunches every week, because I had several moms voice like we like knowing that the student pastor who was full time took the time out during the week to go visit some school lunches.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a parent from another church who is, I'm at the place now where I've kind of hit a tipping point where nobody wants a guy as old as me to be the youth pastor.
Because they assume you're like bringing your daughter lunch. Yeah.
So now it's like, I'm not getting the call of like, are you interested in coming? It's like, do you know anyone?
And who would be a good person?
Yeah. Who do you know that would be a good youth pastor? Which is fine. I'm content where I am and no desire to leave. But so I was talking to this mom from another church, and she said, you know, we're looking for a youth pastor. And she said, you know, tell me a little bit about it. I said, well, what do you feel like you're really looking for? Like, help me understand a little more. Yeah. And she said, well, I have a son who's in middle school, and I asked him the other night, what do you think the next youth pastor really needs to be like or have or do? And she said, he told me, I think he really needs to love his students. And that's, first of all, really telling of the previous guy. Okay. Yeah. But second of all, like, in that context, nobody cares how amazing your Instagram feed looks.
That's right.
for your
That's
student
right.
ministry if they just want you to love on students.
Yeah.
And and I think sometimes our creativity can get in the way at times, or we just forget that at the end of the day, all that stuff can accentuate. But man, we've got to do ministry, right? We've got to love on kids. We've got to love on parents.
There are some things that are very core. There are some things in your job that you get to pick to do.
Yeah.
But there are some core things that you should be obligated to do. And I think knowing where in which those things are really important. I think sometimes youth pastor friends get kind of bent out of shape when the hard work that they did for camp goes unnoticed because they never went to any of the senior adult luncheons to tell them how important it was to go to camp.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Like, I mean, I think there's some of that moment, or they feel unsupported by a ministry because they didn't put the time in the other places.
Yeah.
And for anybody that's a full-time or part-time working as full-time kind of person, there is some core things that come with the territory that are not the things that you like to do, or not the things that you think are like super like glamorous and fun to do, that help build up the things that are the things that you do like to do. And it's important to make sure you hit those things.
At the end of the day, you define success for your ministry. You will over time.
You do.
If you're always talking about numbers, then everybody's always going to be concerned with numbers.
That's right. That's right.
And you communicate up as well. Don't expect or assume that everybody sees everything that you see in your ministry. So
That's right. That's right.
We sometimes have this expectation that because we're passionate about something or because we see something a certain way, that everybody else is going to see it as the same.
Yeah.
But we have to be really careful that we don't create and manage, we don't create these expectations that are not even existent, let alone false or unrealistic. And so you've got to be able to champion your cause and your ministry along the way.
That's right. I think that's a great line, Jody, that sometimes we're really good at creating expectations, but we're really poor at communicating expectations.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we confuse vision and expectations together. Like you should be, I mean, if you're trying something different, you should be letting your immediate boss person, whether that's the senior pastor, executive pastor, or a committee or a team, know why you're doing things a little differently.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, because they don't do your job in all the hours you do it. They only know your job now from the way it was done. And so if what you're offering is a futuring kind of proposal that would change the way that you're doing something, or you're allocating a priority, like you need to let them know and communicate like what you foresee as a change in expectations, so that they can begin to like kind of gauge, judge, and grade you on the things that you want them to expect about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if they pull out that job description that hasn't been updated in 7 years, you may not be throwing the monthly fellowship like you were supposed to.
Right.
Or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, you make a good point as far as like that hiring process of, it's a two, and as a young guy,
23-year-old Zach would not have known to say that.
No, that's what I was going to say.
Don't hear me say it.
As a younger guy, any opportunity I had to go was like an amazing opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And I hit a tipping point where, maybe not so much. This is more of a I'm interviewing you as much as you interviewing me kind of thing. I want to make sure that we're a good fit for one another. Because
you just want the job. You're like, I'll do whatever. Yeah.
And I think there's still a part of you in to be honest, there's always a part of you in that you don't want to lose, right? And
sure.
But you're right. And I think too, one of the things that I point out, if you're in a situation where there's a committee, whether it's a search committee or whatever, who's looking, I think one of the things to be really mindful of, especially when you're asking your questions, is generally speaking, the people that end up on those committees are the people that are really passionate about youth ministry.
Yeah.
And they may not necessarily, although not like intentionally so, but they may not be speaking for the rest of the church.
Yeah.
They may feel really passionate about the youth ministry doing, a certain thing or being a certain way that the rest of the church may not necessarily agree with.
That's right.
So I think you've got to be wise in your questions as you're asking those things to be able to discern beyond that room what the expectations of the church as a whole are.
Well, because it's so true that some people in the church that are very invested in the church are measuring the youth ministry by how polite and mannered the young people are on the Sunday morning worship gathering.
Sure.
And that's it, because that's all they see them in. Like, they don't see the midweek thing that you got put all the energy into and like really blew it out and had, lasers and lights and a band and whatever. If the kids are unruly on a Sunday morning that they notice or they see, that's what they're going to grade on. And that's probably not fair or right, but at least now we can be aware.
Yeah.
and begin to try to work towards that. And again, this is not about making sure that no boy wears a baseball cap into your Sunday morning gathering, or that the kids never text during the sermon, because that's hard. And that's a weird kind of like police daycare role that none of us really feel the vocational call for. But that is a part of the ways in which people are watching you do what you do.
And I think that just goes back to communicating as a whole and beyond where you are. And then I think you can kind of head off a lot of that stuff over the longer portion of your ministry.
Yeah. You can say longer haul. It's okay. Over the longer haul. You can say,
kind of cheesy, man.
I'll say it for you. Over the longer haul of your ministry.
Do you know what's funny? This is a total side note, but probably at least once an episode, there's something that comes up where I that's like, that's an interesting. But I always feel like if I say it, it's like really cheesy. Like I'm trying to.
I'll say it. I'll let you say mine. But over the longer haul. I'm with you. No,
but do you know what I mean? Like you can head off a lot of those things early, and then work towards that. But I think as you consistently communicate the same vision and expectations and successes, then a lot of those things really begin to diminish. And you have to be able to do that without getting offended. Yeah. And that is really hard.
We none of us have thick enough skin, and that's so hard, because it feels like so much of the call makes it a one-way street of, everybody gets to dog us and we never get to dog back. Yeah. And that's, you just have to develop really keen senses of humor and really important seasons or Sabbaths of rest. And that's really,
It just takes it's taken me a very long time to not get offended at every criticism or critique.
Right. And again, it goes back to, you put 40 to 60 to 70 hours a week into this. They showed up for 40 minutes and saw one thing they didn't like. Yeah. And they didn't know. They didn't know that you had put so much into it. They didn't know. And again, you got to communicate it, because they got to know that you really, really put a lot of time into it. Or that young man that was so disruptive during Sunday morning worship has never been to church ever, because his parents are both incarcerated and he's coming to us from a foster home, and he just doesn't know what to do yet, but we're so glad he's there.
Yeah. And recognize that some people still won't care.
And some people will still not care, because we're a church full of saints and sinners.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know about your church. That's not my church.
The good people of Atlanta are all pretty wholesome and holy.
Yeah. Have you ever driven through Atlanta?
I've been to your airport. There's a lot of good gospel work to be done in Atlanta.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. That's true.
Well, I'll just leave that at that.
Yep.
Okay, so as far as stepping in, do you have we didn't talk about this ahead of time, obviously, but are there 2 or 3 things that you can think of right off the top of your head that you would throw out there for listeners to help them manage expectations on both sides? Hey, as you're stepping into a new position, here are 2 or 3 things that I've really learned or saw, and if you'll just do this, it'll make things so much easier and better for you.
I think there's a lot, and this is hard for some, and take this whenever you're listening to this as your first day or your new day. But I think you finish how you start. And I think it's really important to, on the front end, name the things, because it's really hard to, I know that youth pastors love the ask for forgiveness, not permission rule, but 30-year-old Zach would look at 23-year-old Zach and be like, that's fun to say, but you're going to do better longer if you on the front end can describe, declare, proclaim, and goal orient the things that you want to be about, because that gives, and this is the second part, your senior pastor, your lead pastor, your direct boss, ways to protect you and support you. Yeah. If you're trying something new, or you're doing an outreach event that's a little bit, contestable because you're bringing in that band or you're doing that thing or whatever. If your support structure, which is the person that is over your role or guiding you or guiding or directing the church, or your parent support team or committee knows what's going on, they can protect the things that they're aware of, and you've got them know on the front end. The second thing is to manage expectations for yourself. I think a lot of youth pastors struggle with, I didn't change enough lives. Rule number one in youth ministry: you can't fix anybody.
No, the best advice I have
you got
ever
it. Yeah,
gotten.
yeah.
This is it. Okay.
Okay.
So
The best.
I was
The
like,
best.
I mean, this is without a doubt the best advice. I was a very young youth pastor. It was like a couple years in, and I started at 18, so I had no clue. So
you were just voting,
barely, depending. I don't even remember, depending on how that fell. I mean, I've been able to vote.
Right.
But so I sat down with a youth pastor that was in the area. So we talk about networking, right? Who was amazing. To this day, one of the best youth pastors I've ever seen. And I said, man, I don't even know how to ask this, but I'd really like for you to mentor me, yada yada yada. Which that probably wasn't the best approach.
Right.
I said,
teach me what you know.
Teach me everything you know.
Everything you know.
And so I said, can you give me one or two principles that have changed the way you do ministry? And he said, don't be the Holy Spirit. He said, it'll be the hardest thing you ever do, but it will be the thing that saves your ministry. You cannot be the Holy Spirit for your kids. He said, there is a Holy Spirit, and you're not him.
There is. That's
You're
right.
not him.
That's right.
But you have to pour in and invest and minister to and love on students, and then pray that God shows up.
Yeah,
And
that's right. That's the hard part, is that we feel like even if the call we have is supernatural, even if the vocation that we're a part of is supernatural, much of the work we do is work. I mean, we are gardeners, we are farmers that are planting seeds in soil, praying for rain, and tilling the good work. The seed still has to sprout, and we cannot make the seed sprout. Yeah. And so there's got to be times, there's got to be ways, there's got to be days where we can go home and rest on the fact that God will finish the good work that God starts. Yeah. And man, like everything seems so accessible and so convenient that we could just do it. But the truth is, seeds have to sprout.
Yeah.
And
that's
we can plant
really
the seeds.
Hard.
But, it is.
Because
it's so hard.
ministry is really lonely.
It is.
It
is.
Leading is very lonely because you're always out front.
That's right.
You're always out front. So, yeah, I think that's good. Managing expectations for yourself is really, really important for sure.
Yeah.
You got another one, or?
I think know what's required of your job.
Yes.
And know what you should require of yourself. Give yourself permission to ask less of yourself.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's my struggle, to be honest. I will over prepare.
Yeah. Why not? It's God's work. Why not do extra?
We talked about that even earlier before we started recording. I just want to do everything I do really well, and so sometimes that puts me in a place of some unrealistic expectations, and it.
Let me give you my free one from my worship pastor, who is one of the most talented guys I know. Jody, there's a difference between perfection and excellence.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't be perfect, just be excellent.
You know what my worship pastor says? He says,
what does he say?
He says, if you can't make it good, make it loud.
That's another great philosophy. We should have worship pastor longer hauls.
I feel like
I would love to hear their stories.
I feel like they're way more fun than us.
Oh my God! Well, they get to. Last night they had a vote on getting new lighting. I was like, I want to vote on new lighting.
Yeah. Does that mean I get the old lighting?
I was secretly whispering that to myself.
I think that's how that works. When the worship folks get new stuff, we get their old stuff.
I mean, I'm in the old chapel. I should get the hand-me-down lighting. Yeah.
I want all your hand-me-downs, especially the stuff that's broken and that you're throwing away.
Well, so I got two wireless units. One works, one doesn't. But it was free, so thanks.
But it was free, and I had to pay for it. It didn't come out of my budget, so great.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, do you want to talk about just? I know you're running to something here shortly, but why don't you tell folks just a little bit about the podcast, about After 9?
Yeah. So we love Jody, and we are so thankful for the longer haul. But a good friend of mine, Chad Higgins, who is in my network, he's 20 minutes up the road. started a podcast called After 9. And so the title comes from the questions that you as a youth pastor might ask yourself walking across the parking lot on a Sunday or a midweek gathering where you just are in existential crisis mode because you've just been around X number of emotional, raw teenagers. And so questions like, does this matter? Am I good enough for this? Is this job making me fat? What does my senior pastor do on midweek? Like, I never see him. Like, I mean, just all of those kind of like, who am I kind of questions that we typically ask like right after the exhaustion and exertion of doing youth ministry. And so we're just trying to start some honest conversations. They're really funny and great. Chad is quite the storyteller, and it is always a wonderful hour of humor and honesty, and we love it. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's high quality. I mean, it's really high quality.
Thanks, man.
So
Thanks.
You guys have put a lot of work into it.
I'm a former musician, so we already had some pretty good mics laying around. So that was a lot of fun. That helps. Yeah,
that helps. And so, where can people find you?
So, I'm at Zach Workin on Twitter. So at ZAC Workin, WORKUN. And then he's at Chad Higgins on Twitter, Chad Higgins with 2 G's. But at After 9 Ministry is the Twitter handle to find us, or facebook.com/After9Ministry. But www.after9ministry.com is our webpage and has all those links and stuff. So after9ministry.com. We love it. It's a growing community. It's a lot of fun. We'll be at some different things throughout this year. And we just really want to be a source and an encouragement to youth ministers that are asking tough questions, that have either been doing it for 7 months or 17 years, that we're all asking the questions. We just want to start the dialogue.
Yeah, super good. Definitely head over and check that out for sure. Man, I know you'll enjoy it and like it. And be sure, as with all podcasts you love, especially this one and that one, subscribe to those. So
yes,
that
please.
You can get those episodes when they come out. Write and leave a review. New episodes
every Wednesday after 9. So every Wednesday after 9 p.m. Central Time, there's always something new. So we try to take care of you.
So good. Yeah. Write and leave reviews. That's encouraging. That keeps you going, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's right. It
helps out a ton. Helps out a ton with the rankings and reviews as well, so other youth pastors can find it. So that's really helpful as well. Any resource you throw out before you?
So we talked about this a little bit before, and some folks may be already using it, but as the husband of an educator, I am always privy to like whatever's new and cool in education technology. This has been around for a little bit, but Remind app, it formerly was Remind 101, has been nothing but ministry gold for communicating to both our students and our parents. So you can set up an account. As a teacher, professor kind of person, you can give yourself a free doctorate, and you can be professor such and such. And then you can have text numbers with keywords for folks to text in, like a lot of other texting apps. But the ways in which you can organize the classes, quote unquote classes inside of the app is great. You never have to give out your own personal cell phone number, which is in the world of 2016 and privacy and concern and being above reproach is wonderful. But they've also added a chat feature, which lets you in a very monitored kind of way do some feedback with folks. So for instance, we've sent out text messages to parents before, and they were like, wait, what is the date again? And so you can respond back to their specific message from the account, again, without having to divulge your personal information, and also in a way that you can have other maybe leaders in your ministry sign up and use. I know that for my assistant and I, we both use it, so I can track when she's posting messages or when she has messages scheduled. And it's just been a real delight to communicate to folks, because Facebook and Twitter and Insta are great for kind of blasting, but there is nothing like sending specific and directed text messages to your senior guys, to your middle school students, to your parents. It's been great.
That's awesome. Communication is super important for longevity, for sure.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
If you want to get fired really quickly, don't communicate.
That's right. Just have events, spend the money, never tell anybody, or never communicate fully what it was about. Lots of great parent concerns and questions there.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yep.
Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for taking time while you're driving.
Oh, Jody, thank you. Yeah, man. It's been a fun drive, and I'm going to pull in here to Oklahoma City and go do some more meeting. But, Jody, I appreciate you and all your hard work, man.
Yes, sir. Be sure to check out the After 9 podcast. Head over to after9ministry.com and connect with all these guys. Check out Remind app for sure. And, Zach, we'll catch you later, man.
Thanks a lot, Jody. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, see you, man. All right, there you have it. Great interview with Zach. Love what he's doing over there with the After 9 podcast. Appreciate so much his heart for youth pastors and for just kind of giving forward and giving back there. So I hope you go over and check that out. Again, all the links and resources we mentioned will be in the show notes over at thelongerhaul.com/episode 037. I'm also going to link to a couple of posts there that I have written on the blog about expectations. In particular, one that I believe we as youth pastors often come into churches with, expectations, fair or not. So if you are a youth pastor, for sure, I'd love for you to go over and check that out, and then just let me know if those things resonate with you. The other is a post that I believe churches, expectations that I believe churches have for youth pastors, right, wrong, or fair. And so you can check that out too. I'll link to both of those there in the show notes. Also, you'll find a link there for audible.com. I love audible.com, man. If you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you've heard me talk about it a bunch. That's really because I love it. I enjoy it. It is such a practical way for me to be able to read more and do that kind of on the go. And so for listeners of the Longer Haul, there is a special promotion that you can get there. You can get the first month trial there. You can get a 30-day free trial and get any download of any of the 250,000 plus books they have there. So surely you can find one there you'll like. So head over to longerhaul.com/audible trial and grab your free 30-day trial and download. Just see if you like it. If you don't, if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. I'm not trying to push anything on you. I just know it's been really, really helpful for myself and a ton of other listeners that I've heard from as well. And that'll do it for today. That'll put this episode in the books. Man, next episode's a phenomenal episode. We are talking to Rick Lawrence from Group Publishing. We're talking about how to get the most out of a conference. A lot of us find ourselves heading to conferences, and if you're like me, you can feel really overwhelmed with all of the options and all things available. So he'll be giving us some tips on that, as well as talking a little bit about the upcoming Simple Youth Ministry Conference, which is one of my favorites. So be sure to check out the next episode when it comes out. If you've not already, head over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast there or on Stitcher, your favorite podcast player, so that you can get every episode as they come out, and you'll be able to be one of the first to hear next week's episode. And it would help me out a ton. I would appreciate it a bunch if you could head over to iTunes and write a review there, leave a review for the podcast. That really helps with ranking, helps other youth pastors find the podcast, and really, honestly, is just super encouraging for me to do that when I see those, and I read all those for sure. So thanks again for listening and taking time out of your day. I hope it's been helpful for you. We'll see you again in the next episode, and until then, give them Jesus.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast at www.thelongerhaul.com.